Writers, hello, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I just sit down with another writer and we talk about whatever comes to our minds. We rarely talk about somebody's particular book. We usually talk about the author's journey, the highs and lows. I love talking about the lows. I don't know why. That's just so interesting to me. So I think if you're listening to this, if you're an aspiring author or even a published author, there's usually a lot of good kind of tidbits to hear about other writers' journeys that you can kind of hopefully relate to. Before I get to today's guests, I'm going to plug a couple things for me. First of all, When They Find Me, which is my 11th book, comes out in November of 2026. Please, if you're into my thrillers, please pre-order it. I would love for you to do that. Pre-orders are crazy important to a writer. And you can pre-order at carterwilson.com. You can read about the book there, see if it's something that you might be interested in, and lots of different places that you can pre-order from. Please, and thank you. And also, I just wanted to kind of plug my newsletter. If you're not reading my newsletter, now's the time to go and join thousands of others who are receiving my monthly newsletter. Again, just once a month. I try to make it as entertaining as possible. I try to make it as the least amount of salesy that I can make it. I usually have very personal essays in there, things, updates from my kids, from my pets. And of course, there's always an opportunity to win a signed copy of a book from me that I don't offer to anyone else. So make sure you check that out. You can sign up for my newsletter at carterwilson.com. All right, today on the show, I had Andromeda Romano-Lax. So Andromeda is fascinating. I loved speaking with her. I hadn't met her before, but she lives on a little island near Vancouver, Canada, which made me highly jealous. And she's been writing for a long time. You're going to love hearing about her journey. But her first novel, The Spanish Bow, was translated into 11 languages and was chosen as the New York Times Editor's Choice book. So we were talking about a lot about, in her case, big success with the first book. And then, there's a lot of pressure for your sophomore novel. And we spent a lot of time talking about the freedom that she has, both from her agent, but mostly from her editor, to kind of write whatever she wants to write. Whether, you would definitely describe, I think, The Spanish Bow as literary fiction. And her current release, sorry, let me just bring it up here, which is What Boys Learn, which just came out. Her current release is suspense. And she's had suspense novels that were Barnes and Noble, our monthly picks. So she's written, and she's talking about a horror novel that will be eventually coming out. So she kind of writes in various different spaces, and we spent a long time talking about the good and bad of that ability to have. So it was pretty fascinating, and just hearing her whole journey and all of her various education, which all kind of funneled into writing a lot of nonfiction early on, then branching out to going into novels, and hearing kind of that decision-making process was pretty fascinating. And then we made up a pretty horrifying little story based on a sentence from a Stephen King short story. So this is a good one, folks. You're going to enjoy it. This is my conversation with Andromeda Romano-Lax. So you're obviously at home. Where is home? Where do you live?
I live on a small island off of Vancouver Island. And
Oh,
so in Canada, north of Seattle, in Canada, 2 hours west of the city of Vancouver, on a very small island of llama farms and regular farms. And yeah, very rural.
sounds very serial killery
I
in
do
a
lock my door.
in a
I
good
do lock.
way.
It's
Uh,
the opposite of serial killery, but I
that
do lock my.
that sounds very idyllic. Like that
It
was
is.
this. You're Canadian? Did you grow up in Canada?
No, I grew up north of Chicago.
Okay.
I went to graduate school my first time in Nova Scotia. So that was my first experience in Atlantic
Sure.
Canada. Then lived in Alaska 20 years.
Okay.
And then Taiwan, Mexico, traveling the whole country looking for where to live. And then we finally settled on Vancouver Island. So my husband and kids are dual citizen.
Okay. So that's how, well, good for
Yeah.
you. Like everyone's for trying to find ways to escape and you got it nailed down.
Oh, yeah. I'm very happy where I live. And I know you live in Colorado.
I
You
do.
were talking about being in a more rural area as well.
Yeah, I think also the desire to be in an even more rural area. So actually, my partner and I are taking a road trip to New England this summer because her son is going to go to University of Maine, and we're just going to
Hmm.
spend a month in New England, just staying in kind of rural Airbnbs to get a flavor of like, is this where, you know, could this be our
Yeah.
next chapter? I don't know. I feel like, and I feel like you've already beaten this, but like as I get older, just the desire to be around fewer people intensifies. Um, and not that I want to, I love people. I love being around people, but it's like a driving thing. If I drive somewhere, I want to be on a unpaved road, going to a coffee shop, and I want to be on an
Yeah,
island.
I love coffee shops. I love restaurants. But yes, I'm always looking to escape the city and come back to where I live. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Right, because there's travel and you can always come back. So were you so growing up in north of Chicago, were you a creative kid? Did you have writing in your blood?
I love to read and I did enjoy writing, but I didn't think about it as a career at all. And even in college, I didn't study writing. In fact, I avoided it. I took
Yeah.
one summer journalism course. But at that point, I loved nonfiction. And I thought if I'm, first of all, I thought everybody wrote. So I didn't think it was something special. It was so much, I just thought everyone
Hmm.
did it in some way. But then when I started becoming more interested in nonfiction, I thought the best thing to do is not to study writing, it's to study everything else. So you have something to write about. So I got a degree in public policy, a lot of government stuff, economics, almost a double major in biology. My first graduate degree was in something called marine management, which is about fisheries. It was
Sounds
out
like
in
you
Nova
didn't know
Scotia.
what you wanted to do.
I no, I wanted to actually have a broad knowledge base. So that, and then I became a freelance journalist. I was actually a magazine writer from the age of 17.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and
Eh,
my first sales were to 17 magazine. So even before I was old enough to get a regular job, I was actually sending queries through the snail mail and I was doing freelance journalism writing.
Hmm.
And and so I knew if I just kept sort of broadening what I knew about the world, then I could, write more magazine articles. And then my dream was to be, and then I moved to Alaska, where I was a journalist and a travel writer for many years. So I wrote about a dozen small nonfiction books, guidebooks to parks, natural history, science writing. I was able to use my degrees as a credential for, writing about an oil spill or writing
Right.
about cruise ships. So anyway, none of that has to do with fiction. So I had no desire or intention to move toward fiction until it hit me suddenly.
But what I find interesting is that the underbelly of all of those studies was I just want something to write about. So the writing was always going to be the solution. Uh, Ultimately, it's just what form that it would take. And yeah, and that's fascinating, especially going into that realm of, I mean, with those degrees you have, what you wrote sounds, those field guides and everything sounds like perfect. You could have started a Marine Management Weekly. You could have had your own magazine on marine management.
I wrote
Um,
for Pacific Fishing. I mean,
yeah.
but I like the variety of it. I like to have any idea. I love the pitching of this is back in the old days of magazine, pitching, having stuff in the mail all the time. I was also writing creative nonfiction essays, much more creative on the side. Um, I wrote an early book about the Sea of Cortez, Mexico,
Hmm.
where my family and I traveled in the footsteps of John Steinbeck, who did a
Oh, wow.
famous 1940 trip to Sea of Cortez. So we followed in his footsteps by sailboat and sea kayak, trying to give an idea of the ecology of the region and how it had changed since 1940. So I was doing all kinds of writing. I think the thing that came first was just wanting to know about the world and to see as much of it as possible.
Right. And
And
then
then the
obviously some kind of desire to make sure other people learned about the world through your writing, right?
to
That's what
share it. Yeah.
nonfiction is. And it's
Yes.
also interesting that you had a love for the thing that most writers hate, which is the pitching, the putting things in the mail, the rejection slips of, I'm sure
I
there were,
loved it. I loved
why,
all of
why are you a glutton for punishment?
it. I think I'm competitive mostly with myself.
Uh-huh.
And so I actually liked relying, being like living right at that edge of waiting for the first royalty check from my very first guidebook to sea kayaking, which was different from the book I'm telling you about Steinbeck. But my kayaking guidebook to Mexico sold well. And so waiting for that check to come in to cover the rent. I love that.
Huh.
I absolutely love it. I mean, my mom at the time would say, "Oh, I wish we had more money so we could help you out." And my answer was, "I don't want help because I love the earning of the money and the paying the bills and the struggle. I loved all of it."
Yeah, well, that's good because I think, I talk about this quite a bit on this show, but just about the struggle that a lot of aspiring authors go through, and of which, I have certainly tasted that a lot in my life. And that's what kills off a lot of them, and very few. In fact, you might be the first where it was actually fuel rather than like because you were viewing it, or maybe still view it. It's a game,
Yeah. Mhm.
How do I? And I always find that that's a very healthy attitude to have about almost anything in life, especially like a corporate job or something. It's like it's just a game. So you can detach the ego from it in a way that makes it, if not fun, at least intellectually challenging. Of how do I win this game? How do I advance one step? And without like this is my blood, sweat, and tears that I spent a year on, and nobody wants it. That's where most people go to, but that doesn't seem to be the case for you.
I do think that most people have a hard time at that. They don't realize how much mindset matters. Mindset, certainly, and anyone who's ever taught, I've taught in 2 MFA programs as well. Anyone who's ever taught writing has said it wasn't the young, genius, quote unquote, genius in the room who ended up making it as a writer. In fact, often it's the person who came in who seemed to have the most ability in the beginning who often then disappears. As you know, it's about stamina. It's about becoming really good at learning. An autodidact who's like, I'm just going to keep learning. I'm going to figure out how to do this. And especially if that can apply to not only the writing part and the
Yeah.
research part, but also the marketing part, which you also talk about in the show. Saying, okay, I'm going to learn how to use social media. I'm going to learn how to work better with my publishing team. And I'm even going to learn because it wasn't always easy. I definitely had long down spells, but I'm going to learn how to figure out how to make this more sustainable, even emotionally, psychologically sustainable. So how can I get more pleasure from the parts I can control so that I'm not suffering as much through the many, many parts that I cannot control? And
Right.
I think just as we continue to age, what becomes less fun is poverty.
Hmm.
Because I've had
Because it
ups
used to
and
be
downs.
awesome, and now it just is not. It's mildly inconvenient now.
No, I didn't mind. And now I have much more expensive habits. So if before it was okay to make pasta sauce out of one little can of tomato paste,
Right.
now I want it to be better. And now I want
Right.
some really fine wine with it. And I want to, travel comfortably. I mean, my early travels, even with my children, it's like, oh, we're waiting for a flight. Okay, we'll all sleep on the airport floor. And now it's like,
Yeah.
I can't do that anymore.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so the mind game. So I really work at continuing to find new ways to feel like I can handle the stress.
Yeah, totally. And, I think you nailed it when you said, focusing on the things you can control and adding to that, just defining what it is you can, because I don't think a lot of writers think about that. And in fact, I just did a video about this, how I think there's this disconnect because a writer will spend a year, multiple years on a novel, and it gets easier, but it doesn't get that much. It's hard work no matter how you do
Yeah.
it. And so there's almost this sense of like the world owes them because they put so much effort into it.
Oh,
And what they're not looking at is, and the analogy I use is like a professional tennis player that spends 90% of their time practicing and hitting balls when nobody is watching them. and we only see them on the court excelling, and we think, oh, they're just naturally gifted. And it's like writers have to spend those years and be willing to say, it's a game. This part of the game
Mhm.
was me learning. And now I'm going to go write the next thing, and I'm going to go write the next thing. And nothing, very rarely does it come fast. And the people who I've seen, this is a total broad generalization, um, that had massive success with the very first thing that they touched, that never seems to be sustainable. That's
Are-
fluky,
Yeah.
and they still have a lot to learn. They wrote a great book, but that doesn't mean they're capable of doing that in perpetuity.
I think that's the hardest. And we can come back to that, but I don't want to forget to say that I remember reading Stephen King in on his book on
On
writing say
writing.
something
That
like
book comes up all the
"May-
time on the show.
it's
It's such
great,
a
it's
great
still a
book.
great book. But he said something like maybe I'm remembering it the way I want to remember it, but don't even worry till you've written a million words. And so
Right.
I do the math in my head. I'd be like, okay, those articles, those essays, that first book, okay, and maybe now I'm at 500,000 words, like just you have to keep going. So your example of what happens when you do have a big success, that is actually where my career was the most stressful. So I switched from nonfiction right after 9/11. So this was now a long time ago. I was going to write a nonfiction book about a famous cellist named Pablo Casals.
Mhm.
And the reason was just because I absolutely love the cello. I wanted to write something beautiful. I had been writing about climate change at a time before people understood nobody wanted to read about climate change.
Right.
And I was specifically trying to write about ocean, marine climate change, even more esoteric. And I didn't know how to make it compelling. And I
Yeah.
knew, so as a writer, I was like, no, this isn't good enough. 9/11 happened, and there's that feeling of if the world was going to end tomorrow, what would I want to do?
Sure.
And yeah, I was like, I don't want to write about climate change right now. I want to write about classical music. I want to write about something beautiful. So I start following the story. As it turns out, Pablo Casals, he used his music to stand up against fascism in Spain. So he actually refused to play his cello at a certain point as a way to be against
Hmm.
fascism. I was
Mhm.
drawn into that story. I started doing research. I went to Puerto Rico to the archives because he lived in Spain and then later Puerto Rico. Anyway, long research process. And I wasn't even a big fiction reader. And I realized, you know what, this would be better as a novel. That's the form that would serve this book. And so then I decided, well, I'm going to try to write it as a novel. And I had no idea how to write. I never, I hadn't published any short stories. I hadn't written previous manuscripts. Again, doing this all on a shoestring budget. Went to Spain, went to France, did all the research over 2 years. That was the first book I sold. So that was the first novel I wrote. It was not that hard to write.
Hmm.
I got an agent right away. It sold at auction. It was published in 11 languages.
Yeah.
I was able to buy a house, and my husband didn't have to work full time for 4 years.
That's great.
So I had, yeah, and now you know what comes next. And I knew what came next because I loved reading about publishing. So it was this huge life-changing event. And then now what comes next is the sophomore novel.
Right.
So I knew, I mean, I went on book tours. It did well enough. And now I understand enough about publishing to know the numbers. It did well enough. But when you get a really big advance, it's supposed to be, everyone's supposed to know your book, so it didn't matter that I was going on multiple book tours and it was selling all right. Anyway, sophomore novel, that's when the struggle came.
Yeah.
So number one, I finally had money. So then I kept feeling like, where do I invest this? How do I manage it? It's never going to come again.
Right.
Um, how do I write the next book? All these problems with the next book. So another 5 years. So my lowest point was right after that ostensible overnight success. And that's when
Right.
I went way down,
How
way
did your
down.
writing change from your debut to your sophomore book?
Well, I ended up publishing a second book that is still one of my least sold books.
Yeah.
I think the main problem was I was working with an agent. She really only wanted another blockbuster. And so she was saying no to lots of ideas. I had all kinds of problems with that. Then she actually kind of disappeared for a little while. And so
Huh.
I was getting the message from the outside world. This next book has to be really big. You have to save your career, and it just made me not able to do what I was doing before. The reason the first novel was so easy to write was because I wasn't even thinking about an audience. Couldn't really picture it being published. I was just telling the story in a very natural way.
Which
So
I
it's like I
think is
got,
beautiful though. I think thinking about the audience becomes problematic, no matter how far into your career you are, because then you tend to then start dismiss the instincts that got you there in the first place. Um,
yeah, yeah. And I think I wrote another book that maybe was fine, but my agent didn't like it for reasons that had I know what craft problems it had, but it was a question of subject. Oh, people aren't going to like a book about this type of person. I don't want to go into the politics of that. But anyway, so it took me a long time to claw my way out of that. I ended up switching agents. I ended up going to a medium-sized publisher. This
mhm.
before was a large publisher, a medium-sized publisher, and that's where I am still today with Soho Press.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously a
And
very reputable press. Um,
And they have a very different attitude. The attitude is not we expect every book to be a blockbuster. And they have a rare attitude, which I worry is not prevalent in much of the publishing world of, oh, we're looking at your whole career. You're allowed to experiment, you're allowed to change between subgenres. And every book's going to be different. And so then finally getting back into that place of learning and enjoying. And then I wrote several historical fiction novels. And then more recently now I've written two suspense novels to cut the story short.
yeah, and that's a great point because I think there is a perception, which is, I think, largely accurate about, you're not going to be a mid-list writer with us forever. We're not going to invest into your career, and that's I don't know. Like I'm with Poison Pen Press, who absolutely is just like we're in it for the long haul, and I was several books in with them before I had one kind of break out, and in fact, it's funny, even going to like things like Thriller Fest and BoucherCon, like the only panels that I'll go to that I'm not on, which sounds really egotistical, but it's true, are the business panels because I'm curious. I have a business mind, and craft panels are fine, but I have my way of doing things. And I was on a business panel, and they were the publishing panel, and somebody made the remark that, you absolutely don't have to earn out your advance to be profitable for us. Like mid-list is how publishers survive. They don't they
Exactly.
don't
Exactly.
survive off of the 1%. They have names off of the 1%, and 1% definitely help, but it's all driven by the middle class.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's
And
my
most
perception.
writers don't even know what are realistic numbers. I struggled with that for a long time early on, thinking you had to have these gigantic numbers. But I do think publishers have different attitudes, and I do think it's unfortunate that more are not just realistic about that they can have a stable of mid-list authors, and that can work. And then I would also say, and I don't know your experience, but every book has had its own trajectory.
Right.
And you can't even see the real trajectory only in terms of sales. So like my third novel was a historical novel. It happened to do great in ebook. And also I got speaking fees because it happened to involve some real world 1920s psychology figures. So I was getting some speaking fees.
Yeah.
I have another book that's actually speculative fiction, takes place in 2029 Japan, and there's a robot in it, but I published it back in 2018.
Hmm.
Low sales, great reader reviews. I still get emails, and it was optioned twice.
Hmm.
And I know you're very realistic about optioning. So you can have something that even has modest, say, hardcover sales, but either does great in ebook, is optioned, you get some money that way. Like every single book has been different. And so my first novel called The Deepest Lake, set in Legatitlan, Guatemala, mother-daughter story about a mother looking for her missing daughter. It was chosen as a Barnes and Noble our monthly pick.
Yeah.
And so it's my best paperback sales of my whole career.
Well, of
And so
course.
that
I
just
had the
started.
same thing, and you're on every table. You have your own table in every store in the country for a month.
Isn't it wonderful,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so that's the discoverability, visibility, and doesn't mean I'm going to get that one thing again. But now I do believe there's second chances and third chances and fourth chances. If you can just keep writing what you really want to write and work with a good team, each book might have something different. Something might be made into a movie. Something might be a book of the month club pick of some type.
Right, right. Yeah, and also just kind of not thinking so much about it. Like because you don't these are all the uncontrollables that we were talking about. And and also listening to advice. Like I think it's great. I'm a big believer in writing for yourself, but I also know that when I'm done, it represents my best work for me at this point in time in my life. And now it goes to my agent. Now it goes to my editor. And I know that they're going to have things to say that will help me make the book better. And the people who I think eschew that advice are shooting themselves in the foot because you were perpetually learning and things are changing in the market all the time. And so my editor might come in and my editor, like for my book coming out in November, the first draft of it was very different. And she had this comment. She's like, I really like this. She's like, I'm struggling and it was really a weird conversation because she called me and we were having a Zoom call about it. And she's like, I can't quite put my finger on it. And then she finally says, like, it feels a little bit masculine. And I'm like, that's a fascinating comment, especially because the protagonist was female. But I totally got where she was going with it. And I absolutely changed three-fourths of the characters in the book. I mean, it's a small cast to begin with. That's a way better book now. But I couldn't see that for myself. I needed somebody who's smarter than me with their finger on the pulse of the market to identify, where it might be lacking. And so if we're not learning, we're just we're dying.
I think that's a really great way to look at feedback. Because my experience is that agents, especially, but agents and editors, they're really good at putting their finger on a problem, saying something is wrong here, but not necessarily how to fix it.
Right.
And even if they think they know how to fix it, I'm sorry, but often the way that they're going to prescribe to fix it is wrong, or your writing group.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think separating out those two things, saying, one really smart reader or several readers have said something is wrong here.
Yeah.
Absolutely pay attention. Stop. If anything, I've learned to stop sooner. Like, don't just keep, powering forward, like stop and look at it. But the solution has to come from the writer.
Right.
So
Well,
like
and
in
that's
your
part of the
case,
game. That's part of the fun too, right? It's figuring that out. I don't know how I'm going to figure this out, but I know I will.
and maybe the self-efficacy of I know I can, not, oh no, I just wanted somebody to love my book. I mean, when you first get the email, you want somebody to say, this is perfect. It's going to sell great.
Don't change
But
anything.
that doesn't, it never happens. I mean, I still cringe when I see that first, the
Of
notes you
course.
get back from editors so much. And the difference is that before, when I used to feel knocked down, I could feel knocked down for 6 months. Then it was 1 month, then it was 1 week. And now sometimes it's only a couple hours.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
start skimming through, you're like, oh. And then a couple hours later, you go, okay, I got it. I'm going to make some notes to myself about
Right.
ideas. And so again, for writers, if they're stuck in that place of, this is so hard. It's like, well, why don't you say instead, okay, let myself feel the feelings, but can I shorten that period of suffering?
Right.
Can I go from,
Right.
I feel like crap for a year to, okay, I'm going to feel like crap for a week.
Right.
That's
And
okay.
and adopt the flip side of that attitude, which is an excitement over knowing that the book's going to be better.
Yeah.
It's going to be work. It's going to be hard to get there. I mentally budget 1 to 3 months of time. I know post my agent is an editorial agent. So I make comments, I make changes from her, but just my editor alone, I'm like, this could be 1 to 3 months of work after every draft I give her, every book that
Yes.
I give her the first
Yes.
draft of to get that, like, can I have a new subplot? I don't know what it is, but I feel like we need a subplot. I'm like, oh,
And I still feel frustrated that I can't go faster. I think if I would change something in myself now, I want to be more productive because I have no end of ideas. So I'm
yeah,
still like, oh, I wish I could get this done faster.
yeah.
But
But I think
it
I
takes
think
what it takes.
it's frustrating, but I do think depending on who you are, because I'm the same way. I'm not a fast writer, and I don't write a lot every day. But I also know that that's my system, and I'm preserving. I think at least this is an excuse I give myself. I'm preserving my voice, because I can you not feel that moment in writing? And for me, it's post 1 hour of attentive writing where I feel the diminishing returns. I can sense them. I'm like, I feel like I'm getting lazy. I feel like I'm getting frustrated or impatient. But if I can write within only just an hour, I can hold that level of attention and excitement for my story. And I think that shows. So, if I
Yeah,
can write a book a year, I'm happy.
oh, that's great. Consistency, I'm sure you'd agree, is more important than whether you write every day or how much time. It's just whatever you find works for you. Can you be consistent about it?
I
But
think,
so I'm
yeah,
so
go ahead.
curious, Carter. You said that you figured out you were told that the book was too masculine. Can you give us an example of something you were able to change to make it less masculine?
Yeah, I'll spill the whole story, not the whole story, but kind of it. This is a home invasion gone wrong, and the protagonist is the owner of the home, female, a remote mountain home, population 300 in this town, and 2 days before Christmas, and so it's really just her and these three home invaders for the entirety of this book because they're all blocked in with a snowstorm, and the home invaders were three men who were mob connected in Philly, and they were looking for somebody who was under witness protection. And they thought this was the guy's house. And so they just simply had the wrong house. Um, and so one of the points of view was from one of the guys because it was going to be his first kill. So it was her voice and his voice. And I think the fact that there was this mob
Mm,
atmosphere made it more, this is a book, I mean, totally generalizing. This is a book maybe that would be more attractive to men because it's kind of got that language and stuff. And I'm talking to my editor on this call, and she's like, I just, had those comments. And then it just in my head, I'm like, what if it was a cult? What if it was like a father and two adult kids? And
mm,
she's like, I like that. I'm like, and I have no ideas beyond that. That just popped into my head. Um, But then I was able to have the adult daughter of this freakish guy, this cult guy, be the other voice. And so
that's
then it
great.
really, but what was amazing about it is I remember when I set out to write it, and I'm not big into messaging in my books, but if there's a message, it's usually in my head. And this was a kind of a rage against the patriarchy kind of a book. So these men invaded this woman's house, and she just wants to be left the fuck alone. But all of a sudden it became interesting because you had this daughter now instead of these three men, but there was a whole different level of patriarchy because her father was very controlling and kind of, and I'm like,
Mm,
this just makes so much more sense. There's so much more duality between my protagonist and this woman, this other woman, that it was meant to be. But I never would have gone that direction had my editor not had those instincts. Even though she didn't tell me how to solve it, she knew how to
right.
react when I had a. So to me, that whole brainstorming is one of the best parts of writing, even if it's collective brainstorming.
I often wish I actually got more feedback and direction even than I do. And I have friends who are often with large publishers. They get pushed too much the other way. They'll hand in an outline or something and they'll get no after no after no because the publisher really has a firm idea of we want this last book to be followed by this next book. And I have an agent and an editor who don't do that, but I would actually like even more of that. I don't want to be told exactly what to write, but I often have multiple attractive ideas.
Right.
So I
Right.
wouldn't mind if somebody said, well, between those two or three, here's the one I think we should
So do
work
you
on now.
not
Here's
go to your editor? This
yeah.
brings me to what I wanted to ask you about. You've had this varied experience and resume of different types of output, right? I've just really across the board, which is and having that creative freedom is amazing, but it's also difficult because how do we know what Andromeda writes? Because she's doing different things. Now, last two books, you said suspense. When you have all these ideas, are you pitching to your agent like to your point there? Like, I do have these three ideas. One of them suspense. What do you think? Should I go in this direction?
A little bit, yes, with the agent, also with the editor, where I'll be saying, like, I already know I won't talk about the next book. I'll talk about the next book is horror, because for the first time I was writing
Hmm.
a story that started out as psychological suspense, but it had a lot of supernatural in it. And we all know horror is big right now. My publisher has a horror imprint. I started reading more horror and I realized I want to have fun. I want to make this more horror. And this
Hmm.
is the book that I'm finishing up right now in a very messy revision right now. Um, but then there's the one after that. So I started saying, okay, I don't want to keep, if people think of me as now writing this more domestic kind of suspense novel, I want to give people one of those as well. Wait, should it come after the horror? But I also had this other idea that has some historical fiction elements in it. Should that one come after? So anyway, I don't get a clear answer. If anything, I pinned down my editor last time I saw her at a lunch in New York, and I said, okay, I have this and this and this. And here, when I talk to book clubs, they seem excited about this, and no, they will not push me hard
Hmm.
to just one thing.
And
So I just have a different type of editor than a lot of people
you
have.
do, you absolutely do, because and then there's also editors who will say, I love the fact that you're going to do horror. I'm not a horror editor, so you're going to have to pitch that to somebody else. A lot of editors are very, very focused in a genre, and so they might not. Certainly, if you're going YA or romance or something that's outside of the realm completely of crime fiction or suspense, but even horror, a lot of times, you know, adult fiction editors will be like, yeah, we have people who do horror, but that's not what I do. And
Right.
that becomes a very hard decision too. But yeah, you're set up in a place that, I mean, it's great, but it's also a lot for you to kind of self figure out.
It can be too much freedom. They say that too much freedom is actually a problem with creativity. We
Yeah.
often think it's the other. So I think I could use maybe a little less freedom. But I have to say, when I've been looking at this marketing piece, because I even in your other podcast, this multi-lane author question comes up a lot, because the conventional wisdom is you can't sell as many books if people don't know exactly
Who you
what you're
are.
giving them.
Yeah.
Um, and you don't kind of repeat it. But I have a lot of problems with that. I mean, let me just take an example. Alma Katsu was on your show,
Yeah.
and I've just started reading her in the last year. Love her work.
Yeah. She's great.
And I think at one point on the podcast, she said, "Hey, everyone, don't listen to me. Don't do what I did," because she jumped genres from spy fiction
Mhm.
to horror. She said, "Never do this." She was saying that, but if she had not made that jump to
Right. It
horror,
worked for her.
I would have never discovered her. I didn't
Right.
even know she did anything other than horror. I was looking for horror and her name was coming up everywhere.
Yeah.
And now I've just gone after listening to your podcast, I just went and bought her spy book,
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
spy
That's
book.
great.
Because I actually do want to read. I'm like, oh, I already see her style. Now I'm curious. I don't usually read spy novels. I've never read a spy novel by a woman author. I've read John le Carre, but I want to read Alma Katsu's spy novel.
Yeah.
So there's all these flaws with that thinking. One of the flaws is, well, what if you don't switch enough times to find out the thing that you're really going to get compensated well for? Because
Right.
you're like, no, I have to stay in my narrow lane. And then the other Taylor Jenkins Reid is another example of that. And
Mhm.
I haven't read her work, but she wrote different books before she wrote her breakout books that she's really well known for now. So if you don't make some of the jumps, if I hadn't jumped to suspense, I wouldn't have had Barnes and Noble our monthly pick for Deepest Lake.
Right. Well, totally.
So
And right. And even if you're within kind of a broader lane, you change your voice changes over time. I mean, I clearly see it in my own books. Like it's funny when someone's like, "Oh, I want to buy one of your books. Which one do you recommend?" I almost never identify. In fact, I can say I clearly never identified my first four books. And I'm proud of them and I love them, but I'm like, I feel like that wasn't who I am now. And
yes.
so you do change, and people might like your last book, but might hate your first one because your voice is totally different. But if nothing else, we're constantly evolving, or hopefully we are.
So here's this new idea. I want to throw it out to you because maybe you'll just say, no, that doesn't make sense to me about this multi-lane author conundrum. I've been thinking a lot about actors whom we love and why we love them. When it comes to an actor, I think we're most impressed when we suddenly see an actor we love and they do something different. So, you see an Adam Sandler and he's been in all these slapstick movies, and then he does, an Oscar-worthy, dark, serious role. He's
Yeah.
done a couple of those. That's when people pay attention. Or I I mean, Meryl Streep. I mean, maybe that's an unfair one to even choose. She's so famous. What if Meryl Streep was stuck in her career and she said, "Well, I kind of want to do a fun movie where I get to sing or play guitar," and people said, "You can't do that.
Right.
You're gonna alienate. You're gonna estrange all the people who love Silkwood and Out of Africa and
Right.
whatever." And then so she didn't do the one that's Mamma Mia, or she didn't do the one where she's the rock star. So I
Right.
think when it comes to actors, we identify them and we think, why I do sometimes want them to keep coming back to this genre I love, but I also want to see them in really different roles because that's when I'm really impressed. Don't you think we could at some point feel this way about authors, and maybe things are changing as people are kind of connecting more to the author, that parasocial relationship? Like, ooh, I still want this author to come back and do my favorite things, but I kind of want to see them experiment as well and surprise
Yeah, I
me.
don't think I think it's an apt analogy. I think where the issues stem from is one, the name of the author is the name, right? That's the whole book is that author, as opposed to a movie, you might just be one bit player in it. I think the bigger issue is it's the time investment by the audience. I'm investing 2 hours and this actor's trying to do something different, and maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. But if it doesn't, I didn't spend a month reading this book and then be like, this
Yes.
isn't for me.
Yes.
Yeah, it's tough because if you do that too early as an author, and I think you're probably an exception to this, but I think if you spread your wings too much as an author early on, nobody can ever define you, which is kind of good. I get that, but it's also like you want people to associate your name with, I see their I know who they are. And if you're all over the place, no one can really nail you down. And I think that does become hard for the publisher then to how do we market this person? Marketing a book that's a multiple genre book is hard enough. Marketing an author who's really going from genre to genre, I think is even harder. Because they're trying
Right.
to, because that's why we see so many people change their names when they start writing in another genre, because they're afraid that, like, well, you're only known for, and that's usually more a bigger jump, right? Romance to horror would be like,
Yes. Where
uh,
you might upset somebody because they don't know what this book is. They open it up and they're like, I didn't want this. Yeah.
right. Well, yeah, and
Or why?
I just had this conversation with somebody who I mean, she's got like 45 books and she's known primarily for cozies, right? And then she went dark, went straight thriller, language, violence, the whole 9 yards. And it turned off a lot of people who were her readers, but and also all of a sudden people are discovering her. And they
Yes, it did.
probably won't go back and read her cozies because that's a different
Right.
audience, but it also stems from, I mean, I think that kind of the basis of all of this is like, what do you want to do? Like, what you don't want to be an author who's just like, I'm tired of writing the same thing. Like, I need some creative freedom. I need to stretch my legs a little bit. I always think one of the best examples I always think of is like John Grisham, because I used to read him early on, and I just, good legal thrillers. I was always fascinated. And he comes out with A Painted House, which is a period piece, has nothing to do with the law, and it was literary fiction, and it was beautiful, and it sold probably great because he was John Grisham. And I'm like, for me, it was like the first time I'm like this, I always thought he was like maybe not the greatest writer, but great stories. And I'm like, this dude can write really well. Um, I think with the actor thing analogy, sometimes it's using your Adam Sandler example, and I know it's worked out for him because he can be a very compelling dramatic actor. I think the cynical audience will say he's just trying to get some kind of critical recognition that he feels he's lacking with his popular
But
movie.
then you go look up the Rotten Tomatoes numbers, and he gets both critical and audience super high numbers for those
Yeah,
serious ones. And then he gets really low numbers for the slapstick ones,
right.
even though that's his brand. I
That's
mean,
the one. That's
comedy,
the ones where he's making all the money.
and that's where he's making the money. And people still watch them, and then they say, I didn't like it for this reason. But they're still, it's
Right.
so. But I like what you said, the part that you said that did not occur to me was about the amount of time you're spending with it, because I love looking at art forms and how they're different. You look at a painting, you might look at it for 1 minute. You listen
Right.
to a song, 3 minutes. Movie, 2 hours. Used to be an hour and a half. I wish it still were. Movies are getting longer. And then books, 8 to 12 hours maybe.
Right.
And so you're absolutely right that there's a different level of connection based on the time. But the authors that made the biggest impressions on me early in my career were Ian McEwan, Margaret Atwood,
Yeah.
Kazuo Ishiguro. And these are all people who have written literary, historical, speculative, mysterious, surreal. They are some of the most literary authors out there. And they
Right.
have just, the thing is, when they do it so well, they're not labeled with all those subgenre names. They're just called literary,
Right.
literary. And yes, you can use speculative elements in there, or she can.
Right.
And so, and then you get to, well, I can't stop myself when I have a new idea and I'm excited about it. So I actually maybe, I was saying, oh, I wish my editor would say, do this one, do this one. But the moment I get infected with a new idea that I'm excited about, I just can't even stop myself. That's what I want to write. And that's what I write.
And I think that's healthy. I think from a career perspective, you also have to be aware of the consequences of that. Because I've
Yes.
done the same thing and I talk about it all the time. My COVID book, everyone had their COVID book when their brain was in a very different place. And a lot of people, myself included, were yearning for what we thought were better times. And so I wrote a kind of a coming of age thriller based in 1987.
Mm.
And it was a struggle. I loved it. It's one of my favorite things I've ever written, but it was
Oh,
received critically fine, but it didn't sell. It was probably one of my least selling books. Um, my publisher, embraced it, but not enthusiastically. And I totally understood, but but I'm like, I want to do this. This is important to me and this feels good. And they were great about it. But I see the
you
evidence
don't
of
have you don't have regrets, do you? I mean, you said you loved it. It even got good critical reception. Would you say you have a regret?
I don't have regrets. I will tell you, and maybe this is like speaking too much. I will tell you. So the following book was Tell Me What You Did, which was my breakout. And my agent said, well, I can tell you now, but I was worried you weren't going to come back from the last book. Meaning like maybe the publisher was going to drop me, maybe if I can't write something that sells more copies. Um, but
Got the bad news later.
everything's a risk. So I mean this
My
is
my my first agent, one of the books that she panned after I'd written a quarter of it, she said, "This book will be the end of your career." This is so many years ago,
that's a great
and it was
blurb for the front cover.
on the back. But it was only because the main character was a writer. And the thinking back then was that you cannot write a book with a main character who is a writer. Well, now we've had so many. I mean, we already had at the time. I used
I
to
mean,
read
Stephen
Philip
King's
Roth.
written a ton of them.
There's so many, and there's been so many, even lately, so many thrillers that are about
Yeah,
publishing authors over
right.
and over again. So I still think that was ridiculous advice. I think she was completely wrong. So yes, we
Yeah.
should listen, but they don't know. I mean, if publishing people knew what sold books, then we wouldn't have, only 5% of the books making a lot of money, right? I mean,
Right, right. And that's
they
also
don't.
kind of not only is that frustrating, it's also a little beautiful. I love that it's so unscientific. There's something profound about it, meaning like there's magic that's just in the ether somewhere. And once in a while you might dip a toe into it and nobody
I think
knows
it
when that might happen. And the best can always be yet to come with the publishing industry. You don't ever peak. That's one of the things that I think is so magical about this business and makes up for all the uncertainty and all the frustrations.
As long as you stay in the game. And again, I think it's important because you can get very fearful and feel like, okay, but I can't lose my agent, I can't lose my publishing house. But you can. I mean, I know so many
And
writers
you
now who
will
have,
like change. That's the
yes,
nature of the business.
and they'll have one self-published book and then they'll have a big publisher, they'll have a smaller publisher. And so that's the next thing, is starting to think about it as a career, not getting so panicky about each book. I feel like I've been both under rewarded and frankly over rewarded. I
Yeah.
feel like I've gotten sometimes paid more than they should have paid me, honestly.
Yeah.
And then I've even gotten better reviews than I should have gotten, and the other way. And so I feel like there's this sort of karmic evenness if you just see it as a
Yep.
really big picture.
I agree. Well, Andromeda, we're going to wrap up, but now is the time that you've been waiting for, which is the storytelling bit of the
Why
show.
I've been Yeah, you're thinking, why is she talking so much? It's to avoid
She's
this
she's
part.
she's avoiding. I've got three books here. We're going to pick one. We're going to pick a random sentence from a random page, and
Okay.
I'm going to read that sentence as you know, and then we're just going to go back and forth for a couple minutes. I'm trying to get my cat. My cat is like,
I did really badly in school. I was a terrible student. I think this is what this is going to feel like.
oh wow, this is like the SAT test. Um, I've got Stephen King's Just After Sunset, book of short stories.
Hmm.
A Canadian, Hannah Mary McKinnon's Never Coming Home, and Philip Roth's The Human Stain. So, kind of
What?
a diverse group of books here.
Strange mix. Okay, I can't do Philip Roth. But let's do Stephen King. Let's do Stephen King somewhere around page 70, even though it's short stories, which may throw us off, but we're only going to get a couple
We can do
sentences.
whatever we want with it. You know, I'm just going to read the first sentence on this page, and you can do whatever you want with it. He drew the knife away, and although her peripheral vision couldn't quite pick it up, she felt a tiny seed pearl of blood blooming there.
Dad, do you understand who I am? I'm your daughter. Can you see me? I'm your daughter.
She didn't hear him, or he didn't hear her, she knew. He was sleepwalking again. There was nothing more horrifying than when his hulking frame would appear as a shadow in her bedroom door. But never before had he had a weapon, and never before had he said the words he told her.
Gina, Gina, he said. That was not her name. It was not her mother's name. It was not her father's first wife's name. She had no idea where that name, Gina, came from. And yet he said it with such anguish in his voice that even though he was holding a knife to her neck, she felt great sympathy for him. Who was this Gina? What a
He, re-
stupid name. I don't know why.
he, he repeated the name over and over again. And finally, his free hand slid over her mouth so she couldn't scream, she couldn't cry, she couldn't even try to reason with him. And he said into her ear, Gina, it's okay. I'm going to get it out of you. Just let me get it out of you. We're going
Um,
horror.
at that moment, she heard footsteps in the hallway. She almost wished that her mother had not heard what was happening because bad enough that one of them was going to be hurt. Now it was going to be two of them.
Oh, I think we leave it there.
Okay, and I think you should have left it on your part. But anyway, that was fun.
That was creepy. I there was is
I loved the last.
the weird
That's
thing
great.
that occurred to me. This is a weird off story. I when I was in my 30s, I decided I wanted to learn guitar for whatever reason. And so I had this guitar teacher that was very interesting, great guy. He eventually committed suicide.
Oh,
Um, he had mental issues for sure, and he had told me once how he was in the shower one day and he just was consumed by the idea that there was something in him, and
oh,
he used a knife to try to get it out. And I mean, it's so creepy. And that's immediately what I started thinking is like, what if the dad is actually trying to save her, but his mind is
exactly.
twisted.
And
Yeah.
that's very Stephen King to find empathy for that person.
Right.
Instead of just having a villain out there, it's somebody that you really, really care about.
Right. The best
Well
thing
done.
about a villain is somebody who's convinced that they're doing the right thing.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Well,
well,
that
what a
wasn't so
pleasure
bad.
to hang out with you and to talk to you and to hear about your beautiful little island life.
Are you going to be about your con in Calgary?
I'm not this year. My book is out just after that, and I'm just, it was more of a financial decision than anything. Although I've never been to Calgary and I would love to go, and I'm not I think next year it's in DC, which is not super appealing to me, but like so I always commit every year to Thriller Fest because I work with the debut authors there, but Voucher Con's kind of like, is my publisher going to be there? Do they want me to go? Kind of a thing. But I
I've
assume,
never been to Thriller Fest. Yeah, I'd like to go to Thriller Fest once.
oh,
Yes.
it's great. It's great. It's not cheap. I think that's the biggest struggle I think a lot of people have with it. Just by default is, when you're in New York City, it's going to add up. So, but hopefully we will get to meet in person.
Yes, we will. Yeah.
All right. Happy writing. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you. You too. Bye bye.
Bye. All right, that is it. That is my conversation with Andromeda Romano-Lax. It was a good one. I told you her journey was fascinating to hear about. Highly prolific, has a million ideas in her head at once, and coming out with very different types of books, all at a very high level. So I love talking to her, and I hope I get a chance to meet her in person someday. You can read about her most recent book, What Boys Learn, at her website, which is romanolax.com, ROMANOLAX.com. And if you want to pre-order my book or sign up for my newsletter, you can head on over to my website, carterwilson.com, to do that. And if you're interested in any of my writing coaching through Unbound Writer, or if you're interested in our Parisian suspense writing retreat with Alex Finlay, Clemence Machelon, and special guest Riley Sager, head on over to unboundwriter.com. We are now open for registration for our retreat, which will be in Paris, Paris, France, not Paris, Texas. May 3rd through 6th, 2027. So check that out. All right, friends, that's it. That's it for this episode of Making It Up. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And we'll be dropping another episode just next week. Take care.